I used to volunteer firefight with. This was in the early/mid 2000s. I decided to join the local fire department as a volunteer firefighter. I did it for about 5 years and it was great. Training consisted of 3 months of fire training, 2 nights a week and all day Saturday, and then you would go to EMT training, another 3 months of training. I was about a year and I was asked to help train some new recruits. One of the lieutenants, Amy, was a short, middle-aged woman who was so full of fire she could make a grown man cry. One of those people who commands both fear and respect wherever she went. Honestly, a great lieutenant and great person. When she wasn't being a drill sergeant, she was extremely kind and generous. She would often bake people cakes and treats and deliver them to the various stations in our department. However, in this new academy class that I was asked to help with, there was a cocky kid that we will call Aaron. Aaron talked big during the training and acted like he was the all-American hero. Like he was going to be the lead badass in Backdraft 2. He performed moderately well in training but far from the top of the class. He gets assigned to Amy's station, which is a pretty quiet station in the department. A few months after he starts, Amy swings by my station one night to say hi. She brings us the motherlode cake from Claim Jumper, massive 6-layer cake. She explained that she had treated her crew to a night out of Claim Jumper, which must have cost a lot of money. I think she took out about 8 people and bought a whole cake to top it all off. They had eaten the first 2 layers, so she gave us the remaining 4. We thanked her profusely and she left. Back then, the big social media platform was MySpace and I decided to look up some of the people in the department to make friends. I came across Aaron's page and I noticed some photos of him and the rest of his crew at Claim Jumper with Amy. However, when I read the comments, he bragged about how he had purposefully ordered the most expensive dinner, appetizers, and drinks since Amy was buying. He bragged about how he was going to take advantage of her stupidity. This alone pissed me off because she was doing this super nice and generous. What an ungrateful, selfish dick. Then I read the rest of his profile. He had videos and memes on his page glorifying himself as a badass firefighter, bragging about running into burning building and how he was such a hero. He was flirting with girls, blatantly trying to impress them with how brave he is. Bear in mind, he just graduated from the academy 3 months prior and hadn't even gone to EMT school. He had never been to a house fire and all he basically did was carry gear for the other fully qualified firefighters. It was too much for me to tolerate. So here is the revenge. I printed off copies of his MySpace page, including his comments about Amy and toxic bragging. I made multiple copies and took them to every station in the department. We all had pagers, God I'm old, and a small keyboard at each station to send out text messages. I made an anonymous, all-staff page to everyone in the department. I had to keep it brief since I couldn't fit a ton of characters, but I sent out his MySpace info and told everyone about how he treated Amy. Within an hour, Aaron had cleared out his MySpace page of all posts, photos, etc. A couple of days later, he deleted his account. It's a good thing I made so many copies, smiley face. Immediately after this happened, he stopped coming to volunteer and a few weeks later, I heard that he had quit. I later talked to Amy and admitted I was the one who sent the page. I told her I hated how he treated her and she thanked me. She seemed really sad and hurt by what he had done. But being the tough short lady that she was, she quickly got back into being an actual badass firefighter. She later started dating and married a fire chief that also helped at the academy. I've lost touch with her, but I hope she did well. She seemed pretty happy last time I saw her.
I live in a country that employs a large foreign expat workforce in pretty much every industry and in all levels. For someone to move here for work, they have to be sponsored by a company or the individual that's employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. So here's the story. I was lounging on my couch, enjoying the last of my weekend one day, when I get a call from telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server, let's call her Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure, essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically, the police walked in on them whilst engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed, but the guy she was with, or practically on top of, I should say, has his junk out. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare their senses back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offense, or else. A slap on the wrist, basically, and everyone got to go home. But it doesn't end there. That night, something clicked in my brain, and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day. I thought maybe they called the police on them immediately for some reason. Or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked him to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day, the police have never been to that restaurant before. And when they did, they simply walked in, went straight to the back booths where the two were sat and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them point blank. The question was who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to speak to her anyway that day, both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the employer, "You know you did something stupid" chat and reassure her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in. Without hesitation, she said it had to be Sami, who was one of our drivers. "Why do you think it was Sami?" I asked. "He's the one that dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend walk in right after me and called the police on us." She said, "I knew the part of him dropping her off was true, that literally his job and her only free mode of transport. Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that even if he had seen you do anything?" I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her, apparently, and kept trying to get her into bed, she said. What genuinely pissed me off was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once, and she fought him off, and that he hasn't tried or even said anything since other than be very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, "Why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away?" She said she had dealt with it her way, and it stopped. Plus, she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account. And she didn't want any interaction with the authorities, so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now, clearly I was about to fire Sami, but in my mind that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to rape a person, basically, and not get in trouble for it? Not okay with me. But it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sami. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, "Obviously you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend?" He stepped in it right away. "Heard about it," came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud AF and positively beaming Sami. "I called it in." And this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sami, every now and then, he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife, who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful, but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older fart like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked, "And why call the police?" He came back with, "After I dropped her off, I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walk in after her, I called police because I know him and he is married, and this is against the laws of God and man." I'm smiling now. I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager, or even me, and before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly at that? Why make it my problem and the company's problem what she does in her own time? Silence. head down counting his shoes. "Sammy, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you." He had the audacity to mumble, "I only tried once, sir." I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. This is where I get my not-so-petty revenge. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from we hired him. It was on his CV. I knew that because I called him there to interview him before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. "Hello, Mrs. Sammy. I'm your husband's employer." Well, his former employer anyway. "Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago, and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is XXX. He will be arriving at XXX. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to rape a fellow employee half his age. I'm sorry," I said, and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock.
When I was 9, my mom met a man who, for the sake of the story, we'll call Jay. Jay was an unremarkable man. He was a chef and he was from New York, living in South Philadelphia at the time. My mom, being emotionally unstable, decided to give him a try after lots of past relationships not working out. Seriously, she has a bad taste in men. And I feel it is a good time to mention my dad is dead from a drug overdose. Philadelphia man, drugs are everywhere. So my mom was desperate for someone to be that guy who is good for her and me. She gives Jay a chance, and out of nowhere, boom, Jay has cancer. Came out of the blue, and my mom's heartstrings were pulled by him and she was attached to him for good. I was 9 at the time, so OFC, I was a stupid kid who never thought my mom could be wrong. Well, I didn't notice her getting black eyes, but my grandfather did. So one day at a corner store in my neighborhood, he decided to beat Jay black and blue. He was stuck on the couch for days, and looking back it brings a smile to my face. But he convinced my mom that my grandmother, who was manipulative, manipulated my grandfather to beat him up, so we have to move. After an intervention was held, holy fucking shit, I was there, it was wild. My mom had decided to move. We packed our things in our van and I held my 90-pound Rottweiler on my lap and we moved to Florida. I'm gonna admit, life kinda sucked here. For 5 years I was stuck in such a dumpster fire of a state with no family support. My mom was abused daily and I was mostly mentally abused. I also lost my great-grandmother at this time and I wanted to go back to Philly for the funeral, but Jay said no. Eventually in 2021 my mom left Jay, and then the worst night of my life happened. I was still in Florida, shocker, and I went trick-or-treating with a younger friend. At this point and time my mom was paying for Jay's new apartment because she just wanted him gone. Well, he broke into our apartment, took my puppy for a walk, weird time to care about a dog while committing a crime, but hey, my dog had fun, and smashed everything. My mom decided instead of calling the police she would confront him, with me, alone. So we went, and as a precaution my mom had a knife on her. We went, and when we got there was a girl with Jay. A fight ensued and I called 911. I also beat the everlasting crap out of Jay. Unfortunately my mom couldn't see that and thought Jay was winning. So she stabbed him, non-lethal, his fat got it, he didn't go to the hospital. So when police showed up they gave a good look at my mom with choke marks from the fight, and arrested her for assault and breaking and entering. Well, the trial came and went. My mother is off the hook, but she will be a felon until a completion of a program. So we left him in Florida and decided to move back north to New Jersey. My mom breaking up with Jay was a count to me because I pushed hard for it. Life continues. But November comes around and I received news that made me burst out in laughter. Jay's sister came forward and told us he shot himself in the head. I even read his suicide note and everything. I ruined his relationship with my mom and karma came back. Life goes on, and he dies unloved and alone. This happened a few years back. My dad found out he's super allergic to some kind of shrub in Central Texas, Fort Hood, after he was transferred there. As a result, he was restricted to office work and prohibited by Army doctors from outdoor duties. His West Point grad commanding officer was a hyper-warrior kinda dude who detested soldiers who didn't want to train 24/7. Unfortunately, he thought my dad was milking his allergies in order to avoid being a real soldier. My dad was also married and my mom was pregnant with my older sister, a situation that infuriated the captain because #reasons. The CO never ever passed an opportunity to humiliate my dad by questioning his manhood, doubting his commitment to protecting the Constitution, disparaging his duties, etc. The CO would call him out in front of the company or debase him in front of higher HQ staff. He'd call the house at 6 a.m. on Sunday and order dad in for bullshit reasons, anything to piss him off. In short, he made his life a living hell. For what it's worth, the first sergeant loved my dad's work performance and said so privately. When my dad got orders to leave active duty, which enraged the CO, he found out that the CO received orders for an assignment that was a notch needed to guarantee promotions as well as other plum jobs. Dad decided to fuck with his official records before leaving. As company clerk, he had full access to unit personnel files, orders, etc., which meant he also had keys to the building as well. This was during the pre-digital, pre-computer era. The night before my dad was to get out, he took all of the captain's personnel folders and mailed them separately and anonymously to various posts around the globe, knowing full well it would take weeks to deliver them to geographically unrelated unit mailrooms around the world that may or may not open the packages in order to return them. It just so happened that the unit was in the field for a 2-week exercise on the day my dad left, which meant a skeleton crew would man the phones and mow lawns until they returned from the field. No one was the wiser for weeks. One of my dad's old poker-playing sergeant buds wrote a few months later telling him that the captain went ballistic, that the missing files seriously damaged the fuckface of a captain's career prospects since some of the files were lost in the system. Therefore, the coveted assignment orders were cancelled and the entire personnel record had to be reconstructed manually by the Department of the Army. My dad said it was a teaching moment for the cruel asshole that you should never fuck with your unit clerk, because even chairborne rangers know how to serially wound enemies, foreign and domestic.